Shalom to our viewers, shalom to Rav Menachem.
Shalom.
And we welcome you to the Machon Meir TV Parsha Talks. Rav Menachem, we just commemorated the 17th of Tammuz yesterday.
On the 18th.
On the 18th. And we fasted, we refrained from eating and drinking. And of course, our objective was to remind ourselves that something central is missing, the destruction of the temple. And what period of time have we begun right now?
Right, so it's easy to remember the most recent tragedies that we have, and unfortunately here in Israel and around the Jewish world there's enough tragedies to think about and that hit home and make us want to mourn and reach inside and perhaps see what we need to do to fix. But the truth is, we are approaching now what's called the 3 weeks, which is a period of mourning, national mourning, which the rabbis instituted us for us so many years ago, and it starts with the 17th of Tammuz, the fast day which we just had, and it culminates on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av.
These days don't include Shabbat, correct?
Well, Shabbat is included, but a lesser level of expression of this mourning and the different customs that we have during these.
What particular customs do we see that we're going to be practicing and applying to ourselves to keep the mindset about remembering that the temple is destroyed and we don't have it yet built again in our generation?
Right. Ultimately, our national tragedies are represented by the temple being destroyed. That happened on the 9th of Av, the first and the second temple, with a difference of just a few days. But we include in the mourning all of the tragedies that throughout the ages happened. Some of them during this period, some of them we commemorate on the 9th of Av anyways. But the way we commemorate it is with this 3-week process. We start off, at least according to the Ashkenazi tradition and some Sephardi traditions as well, we don't get married. There's no weddings and big festivals and events during this 3-week period. We don't take haircuts or shave. Most customs,
that's more the Ashkenazi community.
More the Ashkenazi community,
yes.
But some Sephardim as well. The Ben Ish Chai says that during this period as well, we don't get married and we don't have haircuts. The next stage comes on the Rosh Chodesh Av. Usually Rosh Chodesh is a happy day.
It's a day of atonement. That's why we're happy. It's a day of atonement.
We're happy because we get atonement.
We're being cleansed in our inner beings.
Yeah, so, but there's a festive element to it. We say the Hallel, the praise, Thanksgiving prayer that we say on festivals, and there's a Musaf, there's an extra additional prayer, but parallel to the Korban.
With all that
this
said,
Rosh Chodesh is different.
Right, our sages teach us in the Mishnah that once the month of Av reaches, we reach and enter the month of Av, Mima'atim, we reduce, we have less Simcha.
Mima'atim b'simcha, that's
There's
right.
still some Simcha, we just have less Simcha, but what is the
some
stage of mourning?
Simcha is always good to have. Mitzvah g'dola liyot b'simcha tamid, and there's a difference between Simcha and Etzev, as opposed to having some kind of internal joy that what person should always be with. Anybody who's living alive and in relationship with the giver of life has some element of simcha.
So what do we take upon ourselves now during these 9 days that will be coming
during
to
the 9 days, according to the Sephardi halacha, it actually doesn't start on Rosh Chodesh, it starts on the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av. So there's a difference of a few days there, but essentially that is the second period. And during that period, I think most customs don't eat meat. Most Jewish communities do not eat meat, they do not drink wine. On Shabbat, we're allowed to have wine and meat. But for those 9 days, we also don't bathe, we don't go swimming, bathing for pleasure. And
what about music, listening to music?
The truth is, music usually goes together with weddings. So according to the Ashkenazi custom, it's the whole 3 weeks we don't listen to music, just like we don't have weddings.
Although there are some poskim that say during those 3 weeks, if it's not a musical event and it's something perhaps at home, there are some poskim that say you could be lenient if there's need. It's your regular routine of every day. You listen to, some Hasidic music.
Right. The original source is weddings. Weddings is festive and celebration with dancing, and really it's not appropriate for this time period. But if it's just background music, yeah, there are different opinions. But anyways, the second time period from Rosh Chodesh Av, the 9 days, we also don't wear laundered clothing. We don't do the laundry, and we don't wear the freshly laundered clothing, which is also something which gives a person happiness and a sense of contentment or something that's a little bit festive to wear, fresh.
You feel more complete. You feel
yeah,
more sense of more self-completion. Whereas if you're wearing not freshly laundered clothing, you feel something's lacking, something's missing.
Lacking. Exactly. And then the third stage which we reach is on Tisha B'Av itself, actually the few moments.
Just for our viewers, Tisha means the ninth day of Av, the commemoration of the destruction of the temple.
We lead up to the fast itself, which starts at the nighttime. We already start sitting on the ground, sitting on the floor, mourning the temple. We read these special
But prior
passages.
to that, Rav Menachem, what is there not a practice that we have a certain meal right before the beginning of the fast, something unusual, something different?
That's right. Even on the 8th day of Av, in the afternoon, the last meal we have is essentially a mourner's meal, and that we also sit on the floor.
What do you mean by a mourner's meal?
It's a meal which is traditionally given to a mourner. Now this really perhaps is the opening for us to try to understand where all these different customs come from, and perhaps we can think of a framework in order to understand why at this time we have this custom and at that time we have the other custom. And really the source is mourning for a loved one, a personal mourning. When one of your relatives dies, we all know that that's a tremendous shock, and it's a horrible feeling of grief. And the bereavement process in halacha, it goes from that moment where
mourning begins.
Mourning begins, even before mourning begins, when your deceased relative dies, until the burial. There are certain laws. It's called the status of onen, which you're totally
devoted to preparing for the burial.
Right.
It's hard to concentrate and serving God in
mitzvot. That's right. You don't concentrate on anything else except for dealing with your sorrow, and it's as if your dead is lying in front of you until he's buried. That's actually true. The next stage, of course, we all know is Shiva. During the Shiva process,
7 days of mourning.
7 days of mourning, we sit on the floor, or on a low stool at least, and
which starts right after the burial.
Right after the burial for 7 days. And finally, after the Shiva, there's an additional stage of mourning.
But during I'm sorry, Rav Menachem, during those 7 days, what is really the practice and custom? What does a mourner, what does he abstain from doing?
So he also does not bathe, and he does not work.
Doesn't cut his hair.
Doesn't cut his hair. The truth is that's for the full 30 days. Even after the Shiva, Ashkenazi custom at least is that you're really not supposed to bathe for pleasure for the full 30 days. You're not even supposed to wear laundered clothing and launder your clothing if possible for the full 30 days after the death of a loved one. And the final stage, many people are familiar with that, mourning for a parent continues past the 30 days up until the full 12 months. 12 months during which that time period, someone who's mourning his father and mother is not really supposed to attend weddings and not to participate in these major celebrations and listen to music and so forth. So essentially, if we look at the structure, what we have here is we have a lot of laws right after the death of a loved one.
Severe laws.
Yeah. And as we said, you don't work and you sit on the floor, and then people come to you're given this meal, the special meal, the first meal when you come back from the funeral.
And what is eaten in that special meal? Sudat Havara.
Yeah, usually we eat round things. Round things is a symbol of the cycle of life.
Life and death. Life and death.
Right. And
so maybe customs to eat even eggs, which are more circular.
Eggs, chickpeas, different customs in different places. And similarly, we do that on the eve of Tisha B'Av, right before Tisha B'Av starts, the mourner's meal that we have when we're mourning for the temple as well.
So we have that parallel, that mourner's meal for the individual versus the mourner's meal that we all of Israel have for the for the destruction of the temple.
Sure. What's interesting that there is a parallel between the national tragedy and perhaps the national historic mourning that we're trying to connect to, and the personal bereavement and process of grief, but they're flipped. They're exactly the opposite.
Meaning the order
The
of
order
severance,
is the opposite. That's
severity.
Right. That's right. And it makes sense. When someone who's close to you dies, and it's called Avilut Chadasha, a new mourning experience happens to you, so it's most natural. The beginning is the hardest. The most intense period of the morning, you're in shock. You don't know what happened to you. And really, it's difficult to deal with. And so the halacha parallels that and supports that with many, many different laws of things which are forbidden to do, and customs of remembering the deceased one. But slowly, we all know that life continues, as we mentioned, the circle of life, life and death, and we want this mourner to be able to come back to life. So slowly, we relax some of these strictures. After 7 days, you can go back to work, and you should be going back to work. And but we still have some memory and commemoration of your loss. Your loss never really leaves you; the scar remains. And so, at least for that first year, the mourner does not celebrate weddings. And also cutting hair. The truth is, for father and mother, the straight halacha is that you don't cut your hair or your beard for a whole year. Of course, if it bothers you or bothers your friends,
they come and tell you your
your
hair's
wife,
very long.
They come and tell you, they say you really should get a haircut, then you're allowed to. Whereas when we're talking now about the 3 weeks, we just entered
The national mourning.
The national mourning, it's an opposite process. And it makes sense, perhaps. The temple, it's been so many years. Do we really feel the loss? Do we really feel like we've been punched in the stomach whenever anybody mentions that we no longer have Jerusalem in the temple? It's something that you have to develop a consciousness of. You have to really connect to and appreciate what happened to the Jewish people in history. And perhaps the laws are trying to guide you in that direction. And so we have an increasing number of mourning customs.
Until we
start off with parallel to what is the remaining customs for the mourner for the 12 months, the weddings and the haircuts. That is what we start with at the beginning of the 3 weeks, like we just started yesterday. And when we reach Rosh Chodesh Av, that second stage, perhaps some of those laws are parallel to what we have in the 30 days. The 30 days of mourning, we don't bathe for pleasure. And we don't wear the laundered clothing if possible. So really the 9 days is parallel to the Shloshim.
Yes.
And finally, when we reach Tisha B'Av, and the eve of Tisha B'Av, essentially we're like mourners during the Shiva. We sit on the floor as if, and we have the mourner's meal, which is the first meal that the mourner has after coming back from the cemetery. So what the Chazal, what our sages who instituted this process and these laws of national mourning, commemoration, they were trying to lead us closer and closer to have that sense that when Tisha B'Av actually comes, we'll experience the loss of the temple, everything that was involved in having the Shekhinah, the divine presence, and the closeness to God that we had in Jerusalem. When it was rebuilt, we'll recognize that we're ready to mourn for that, as if the mourning is fresh, as a personal mourning which we experience.
Would you agree, Rav Menachem, that really these laws and these customs and practices of mourning, of abstaining from this and from that, they're really reminders so that we be more aware and understanding of what's lacking and missing? And maybe that'll deserve another talk between you and I. What is really lacking and missing? What does it mean that we had a Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple?
Absolutely. At the first level, the most basic level, I see it as a process of connecting to your Jewish identity, to the Jewish people and their history. And as I said, the tragedies which happened over many hundreds of years in different time periods throughout history, we commemorate all that during this 3-week period leading up to the culmination on Tisha B'Av. So it definitely can be seen as a day of connection, away, keeping these customs and perhaps paying attention to the process as we go closer and closer towards Tisha B'Av is a way in which we can connect to the Jewish people and to our history.
Yofi. Thank you very much, Rav Menachem, for the beautiful words. And we're going to have to meet together to talk about what is really the Beit HaMikdash and why are we mourning for it.
It would be my pleasure.
Yofi, thank you. And
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, and thank you to our viewers. Have a nice day and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.